Hello, everybody, welcome back to Gyanan. This is the series of 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People audiobook. How People Think. Chapter 37. There are 4 ways to be creative. Have you heard someone say, "Oh, John, he's so creative. I wish I was creative like that." It makes it sound as if creativity is a natural skill or talent, like the ability to sing or paint. Other times, people say, "I'm going to a seminar to learn how to be more creative." That makes it sound as if creativity is a skill that anyone can learn. So, which is it? Well, both and neither. Arnie Dietrich, 2004, wrote a paper on creativity from a brain and neuroscience point of view. Dietrich defines 4 types of creativity with corresponding brain activities: deliberate and cognitive creativity, deliberate and emotional creativity, spontaneous and cognitive creativity, spontaneous and emotional creativity. Think of it like a matrix, as shown in figure 37.1. There are 4 kinds of creativity. Deliberate and cognitive creativity example is Thomas Edison. Deliberate and emotional is therapeutic or aha moment. Cognitive and spontaneous will be Newton and the apple. Emotional and spontaneous will be the artists and musicians. Creativity can either emotionally or cognitively based, and it can also be spontaneous or deliberate. That gives you the 4 types. Deliberate and cognitive creativity. Deliberate and cognitive creativity is the kind that comes from sustained work in a discipline. For example, Thomas Edison, the inventor of the electric light bulb as we know it, was a deliberate and cognitive creator. He ran experiment after experiment before he came up with an invention. In addition to the light bulb, Thomas Edison invented the phonograph and the motion picture camera. He held 1093 US patents and more in Europe and the UK. Some of his famous quotes include, "I am not discouraged because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward. I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Many of life's failure are men who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Edison is a great example of someone who used deliberate and cognitive creativity. According to Dietrich, this type of creativity comes from prefrontal cortex, PFC. The PFC is right behind your forehead. It's not that PFC is where creative thought takes place. It's more than the PFC allows you to do 2 things: pay focused attention, make connection among bits of information you have stored in other parts of your brain. For deliberate cognitive creativity to occur, you need to have pre-existing body of knowledge about one or more particular topics. When you're being deliberately and cognitively creative, you're putting together existing information in new and novel ways. Deliberate and emotional creativity. I remember a moment many years ago when I was having a series of crises. A long term relationship had just ended in a difficult way. I had moved to a new city where I did not know anyone. I had started a job I wasn't sure I liked. I had rented an apartment that I couldn't really afford, and I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford to buy furniture. Then I discovered the apartment was infested with fleas. I took all my clothes to the laundromat. I couldn't afford a washer or dryer either. And when I went back to retrieve them, someone had stolen them. That was the last straw. I remembered sitting quietly in my office, I had to figure out why all these things were happening. Why did I seem to be making a series of bad decisions? Then I had a aha moment. In the 10 years before the current crisis, I had some tough times, including both of my parents dying. I had to be strong, independent, and take care of myself. I had a belief that said, I am a strong person. I can handle any crisis. I realized that I was making decisions that would eventually cause more crisis, or at least partly so I could overcome them to prove myself that I was strong. I decided right then to change my belief. I said out loud, my life is easy and graceful. I walked across the hall and asked a fellow coworker if I could stay in her apartment for a few weeks until I found another place. I called my landlord and got out of the lease on the flea invested, too expensive apartment and began to make decisions that would make my life easier. That is an example of deliberate emotional creativity. This type of creativity also involves the PFC. That is the deliberate part. But instead of focusing attention on particular area of knowledge or expertise, people who engage in deliberate emotional creativity have a aha moments having to do with feelings and emotions. The amygdala is where emotions and feelings are processed. In particular, the basic emotions of love, hate, fear, and so on. Interestingly, the PFC is not connected to amygdala. But there is another part of your brain that also has to do with emotions. That is the cingulate cortex. This part of the brain works with more complex feelings that are related to how you interact with others and your place in the world. And the cingulated cortex is connected to the PFC. Spontaneous and cognitive creativity. Imagine you're working on a problem that you can't seem to solve. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to staff a project at work and you just don't see how to free up the right people to do the project. You don't have the answer yet. But it's lunchtime and you're meeting a friend and need to run some errands too. On your way back from errands and lunch, you're walking down the street and suddenly you get a flash of insight about how to start the project. This is an example of spontaneous cognitive creativity. Spontaneous cognitive creativity involves a basal ganglia of the brain. This is where dopamine is stored and is a part of the brain that operates outside your conscious awareness. During spontaneous and cognitive creativity, the conscious brain stops working on the problem, and this gives the unconscious part of the brain a chance to work on it instead. If a problem requires out of the box thinking, then you need to remove it temporarily from conscious awareness. By doing a different unrelated activity, the PFC is able to connect information in new ways via your unconscious mental processing. The story about Isaac Newton thinking of gravity while watching a falling apple is an example of spontaneous and cognitive creativity. Notice that this type of creativity does require an existing body knowledge. That is the cognitive part. Spontaneous and emotional creativity. Spontaneous and emotional creativity comes from amygdala. The amygdala is where basic emotions are processed. When the conscious brain and the PFC are at rest, spontaneous ideas and creations can emerge. This is the kind of creativity that great artists, musicians possess. Often, these kinds of spontaneous and emotional creative moments are quite powerful, such as an epiphany or a religious experience. There is not specific knowledge necessary, it's not cognitive, or this type of creativity but there is often skill, writing, artistic, musical, needed to create something from the spontaneous and emotional creative ideas. When you're stuck, go to sleep. Sarah Mednick, a neuroscientist at the University of California, San Diego, wrote a book called Take a Nap, Change Your Life 2006. Based on the research she and others have done on creativity and problem solving. In a typical experiment, she gave participants puzzles to solve. Before they solved the puzzles, she would have them take a nap. Participants who went into REM sleep during the nap solved 40% more puzzles after the nap than when they worked on the puzzles in the morning after a full night's sleep. People who just rested or napped without REM sleep actually did worse. Ulrich Wagner 2004 conducted an experiment where participants were given a boring task of changing a long list of number strings into a new set of number strings. To do this, they had to use complicated algorithms. There was a shortcut, but it involved seeing a link between the different sets of numbers. Less than 25% of the participants found the shortcut even after several hours. But if people slept in between, then almost 60% of the participants found the shortcut. Key takeaways: there are different ways to be creative. If you're designing an experience that is supposed to foster creativity, decide first which type of creativity you're talking about and design for that. Deliberate and cognitive creativity requires high degree of knowledge and lots of time. If you want people to show this type of creativity, you have to make sure you are providing enough prerequisite information. You need to give resources of where people can go to get the information they need to be creative. You also need to give them enough time to work on the problem. Deliberate and emotional creativity requires quiet time. You can provide questions or things for people to ponder, but don't expect that they will be able to come up with answers quickly and just by interacting with others at a website. For example, creating an online support site for people with a particular problem might ultimately result in deliberate and emotional creativity. But the person will probably have to go offline and have a quiet time to have the insights with others. Suggest that they do that and then come back online to share the insights with others. Spontaneous and cognitive creativity requires stopping work on the problem and getting away. If you're designing a web application or site where you expect people to solve a problem with this kind of creativity, you will need to set up the problem in one stage and then have them come back a few days later with their solution. Spontaneous and emotional creativity probably can't be designed for. Remember that your own creative process for design follows the same rules. Allow yourself time to work on a creative design solution. And when you're stuck, sleep on it. To be continued. Thank you for watching the video. Like, share, subscribe.